When you're revising poetry, one of the things you want to look at is where you are going to break up your lines of poetry, where you're going to split between one line and the next. Other than prose poetry, which we're not actually going to deal with right now, poetry in general is broken up into lines and stanzas. And it's not a random thing. There's very careful thought that goes into where you are going to break your lines and where you're going to start a new stanza. Line breaks in general are used to indicate important ideas or words. They're used to draw the audience's attention to a certain aspect. So where the line changes, it has an impact on how the audience reads the poem. And that's true whether they're reading it out loud or whether they're just reading it to themselves. Stanza breaks are like paragraph breaks in prose. They can be used to indicate a change of ideas or topics. Not all poems have more than one stanza, however. In order to understand the impact that line breaks has on poetry and on how poetry is read and meaning, I had previous classes take this prose poem by Rainier Maria Rilke and split it up into lines and stanzas. They got together in groups and decided where the poem should be split up in order to emphasize the message. So here's the original text. Live a while in these books. Learn from them what seems to you worth learning, but above all, love them. This love will be repaid you 1,000 and 1,000 times, and however your life may turn, it will, I'm certain of it, run through the fabric of your growth as one of the most important threads among all the threads of your experiences, disappointments, and joys. So one of the things I want you to do while I'm going through these next couple of slides is keep the cadence in mind. Keep in mind how I said it in this original one, which doesn't have any line breaks, and then what it sounds like when I'm reading the 3 examples that I'm going to read next. Think about where the emphasis is, where the pauses are, and what the impact that has on you as a listener. So our first student example, the group called it Learn from Them. Live a while in these books. Learn from them what seems to you worth learning, but above all, love them. This love will be repaid you 1,000 and 1,000 times, and however your life may turn, it will, I'm certain of it, run through the fabric of your growth as one of the most important threads among all threads of your experiences, disappointments, and joys. Notice how, although I didn't stop precisely at each line, there is a different sort of emphasis there than there was when I was reading the prose poem and just pausing with the commas and periods and the other punctuation marks. So here's the second one. Live a while. Live a while in these books. Learn from them what seems to you worth learning, but above all, love them. This love will be repaid you 1,000 and 1,000 times, and however your life may turn, it will, I'm certain of it, run through the fabric of your growth as one of the most important threads among all threads of your experiences, disappointments, and joys. Notice how parts of that seemed a little awkward. Where the line break wasn't exactly where I wanted to pause as I was reading it. Here's the third one, the fabric of your growth. Live a while in these books. Learn from them what seems to you worth learning, but above all, love them. This love will be repaid you 1,000 and 1,000 times, and however your life may turn, it will, I'm certain of it, run through the fabric of your growth as one of the most important threads among all the threads of your experiences, disappointments, and joys. Notice here we've got period where you've got a bunch of short sentences, or short lines rather, and you can hear that in the way that I read it. The other thing I want you to notice when you look at all three of them together is that there are some similarities. Everybody broke the lines, for some of them, in roughly the same place. And this pattern actually carried through both of the classes that I did this exercise with. So now it's your turn. When you are deciding where to break your poetry into lines and stanzas, there are three things that you really want to focus on. There are three things that are important to consider when you are splitting up your poetry, or in this case, the poem that I'm going to give you in a moment to practice with. The first is meaning. You want to use your line and stanza breaks to emphasize the theme of the poem, the message that you're trying to send to your audience. Use your lines and stanza breaks to draw your audience's attention to key ideas or words. And because of this, you don't often end on a preposition. In the second poem, where I did that a couple of times, it ended up being kind of awkward. You want your last word or words to be significant. In addition to meaning, you want to think about the visual appeal of the poem. Most of the time, your audience is going to be reading it from the page rather than listening to it. So you want your lines to look appropriate on the page. If you've got some that are really long and some that are really short, it looks sort of awkward and it doesn't have much appeal. So that's something that you're keeping in mind as you are splitting up your poetry as well. Finally, in addition to the visual appeal, there is the appeal of the sound of the poem. Whether people are reading it out loud or silently to themselves, they read it. If you have a bunch of short lines, it seems kind of choppy, even when they shouldn't necessarily. People will often pause at the end of a line. So keep in mind that if you have a lot of short lines, they're pausing an awful lot. So keeping these three things in mind, I want you to take the poem on the next page and break that one up into different lines and, as you see appropriate, different stanzas, keeping in mind the meaning, the visual appeal, and the sound appeal. This text is called How to Dismantle a Heart by Rodney Gomez. My mother used to say the heart makes music, but I've never found the keys. Maybe it's the way I was brought into the world, dragged across a river in the night's quiet breathing, trampling through trash and tired runaways as if tearing a window's curtains. We were barred from entry but repeatedly returned, each time becoming a darker part of a tunnel or a truck bed. The sky was so still, the stars flickered like carbide lamps. We told time through the landmarks of the dead like cataphiles, the warren of a little girl's murder, the wolf's irrigation pipe. When you see enough unwinding, beating is replaced by the safety of wings. This isn't goodness. The voiceless are never neutral. Bones sway to elegy. Ebony burrows into the earth as a refugee. I grew up, eventually, but the sun was like a cliff with a false bottom. You'd drop and come out the top again. Enough carcasses draped over the dry brush. Enough water towers empty as busted rattles. When you're a child, the heart has a stiff neck and demands to be played. Later, it limps. Before my knees could begin to ache, I crawled to the levee looking for a broken string, some wayward zill. I stretched my heart over a manhole and drummed it with broken pliers. It wouldn't even quaver. It snapped back into a seed, dry and shriveled and blank. So keeping in mind our three aspects of line breaks, meaning, visual appeal, sound appeal, take this poem and split it up into different lines and stanzas. Keep in mind you want to emphasize key words and phrases in order to convey the message of the poem.